Now I'm to introduce our speaker this evening, and honestly, she doesn't need any introduction, I think, to this audience, but I do want to acknowledge the scholarship. Many of you may know or interact with Susan in different contexts, more in a lot of the engagement, outreach kinds of projects or involvement that she has been working with, and certainly the exhibition is a fantastic example of that. She is also, of course, professor of Assyriology here at ISAC and has a very distinguished scholarship. She began her studies in Munster, both as a BA and MA, and then ultimately earning her PhD with distinction in 2011 at the University of Munster in Germany, and then came to the Institute a few years after that in 2015. She has been here since and has now holds a tenured position, associate professor of Assyriology, as we all know. Her scholarship is wide-ranging, engaging in study of legal traditions, also intellectual history of ancient Mesopotamia, and of course of education. And I think this is part of what is particularly interesting, and what we're going to hear some of the results of some of her scholarship this evening. I want to really highlight or emphasize, just from a more personal side, perhaps, as I've been here only a few weeks, but watching the preparation of the exhibition and seeing her, Susanne's work with the students that have been a part of this project. And of course, as an educational program, it's very exciting to see how Assyriology students, both BA, MA, and PhD students, and also postdocs who have been involved with this. We often, and I think it's a cliche, talk about the ancient languages of the Middle East, the Near East, as dead languages. But one of the things that I think is particularly important and valuable and has been reflected in some of the work that I've been seeing as they've been preparing the exhibition, and then a very memorable opening that happened a couple of weeks ago with some of the students talking about their experiences, just realizing how engaged they are with the study of this language. And in many ways, it's not a dead language in that sense, but gaining very deep understanding about the rich educational pedagogy, the philosophy of education that they have been gaining from the study of the material from this particular structure, this building, this school, if you will, from the site of Nippur that was excavated back in the 1950s. And it's very gratifying. It's been very gratifying to see, both because of the academic aspect of it, but also as an institute that's primary focus is on studying the ancient cultures of the Middle East. It's not simply a study of the past, because it's been very interesting to see how it engages with our own contemporary education. And over again has come out of the conversations that I've witnessed or been a part of, how similar or how common are the experiences that they're observing in this particular context, but also in the larger study of philosophy of education or pedagogical aspects of learning in ancient Mesopotamia. So the study of the deep past has relevance. They're gaining insights that are relevant for us today. And I think hopefully we'll see more of that. You can experience some of that certainly by going through the exhibition and studying the tablets and the stories that they tell, each individual tablet. It's quite remarkable, and I think it's really engaging, and I anticipate over the months to come with the exhibition that many of the groups that will come through may be hopefully students of all ages, and will find that connection to the rich, deep learning traditions of ancient Mesopotamia and Babylonia specifically. So this evening, Susanne's going to give us a presentation on the work of this exhibit and of the larger academics aspect of it. Her lecture is entitled Back to School in Babylonia, the Aims of Babylonian Education. Please join me in welcoming Susanne Paulus.
Thank you, Tim. It's a great thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for the people who are joining us online, and special shout out to the many students who joined. I think my whole class from Babylonian 1 is here tonight, so thanks for coming. And yeah, thanks all of you for being here. Before I forget it, I want to mention that this is the first of 4 talks we're going to have in the lecture series. The next one is by Paul De Niro in November. Then in December, we will have our very own Jana Matuszak. And then in January, there will be one more talk by Eleanor Robson. So out of all of those, I'm possibly the least qualified person to talk about the Babylonian school. So please bear with me. Yeah. When you enter the exhibition, we ask you a question. What is a house set up on a foundation like the heavens? A house covered with a cloth like a treasure chest? A house set up on a pedestal like a duck-shaped weight? One enters it blind and leaves it seeing. While you are pondering, let us look for the answer of this ancient Sumerian riddle by going to a place which is very well connected to the University of Chicago, the site of ancient Nippur in southern Iraq. So Nippur is like in southern Iraq between Euphrates and Tigris. And to find the answer of the riddle, we will join the joint expedition of the University of Chicago and the University of Pennsylvania, 1951, so over 70 years ago. They journeyed to Nippur, and those are the members of the team. So we do have Field Director Donald McCown, Richard Haynes, Muhammad Ali Mustafa as the representative of the Directorate General of Antiquities of Iraq. We do have an artifact illustrator, Marian Welker, cuneiform epigrapher, Francis Steele, and archaeologist and physical anthropologist, Harry Whitney, and field recorder, Elaine Haynes, together with the Haynes children, Alice and Carlton, you see in the foreground. So even on this expedition, there were children involved, and we had like children roaming and getting educated on site in Nippur, while they were also like looking for tablets. And when they arrived at Nippur in fall of 1951, they were likely, like we are nowadays, really surprised and possibly a bit overwhelmed by the sheer size of the archaeological site of Nippur, with its many layers of occupation, really covering millennia. And they were joined, and the whole thing was only possible because they partnered with a team of over 150 Iraqi field archaeologists who not only were mere workers, but really skillful excavating and documenting the site. And if you come into the gallery, you see a video showing and highlighting some of their work as well. The idea was, or the goal of the exhibition, the excavations were really to find some Sumerian tablets. So they were not looking in the first place for big architecture, which they had excavated before, the Enel Zikkurat and also the connecting temple, but now they were joining south of this structure in the hope, as McCown wrote in his letter, that they would that this area would be our gold mine for the literary tablets of the Sumerians, which are almost unique at Nippur. So what they were looking was really Sumerian literature. And why were they looking there? Because in this area, in the not so well documented excavations at the end of the 19th, early 20th century, they had found so many tablets there that they called this area Tablet Hill. But when they started excavating there in the 50s, they weren't so lucky. They found like a lot of domestic structures, but what they were missing were those like literary tablets. There was one or two, but mostly everything they found was of legal and economic nature. And their luck changed shortly after Christmas in January of 1952, when they started excavating a house in the old Babylonian layers. And this is the blue house, which they labeled House F. And they stumbled really on cuneiform tablets over cuneiform tablets. And both the archaeologists and the epigraphists were really excited about the find, but as so often, time was short, and they had to really deal with a lot of tablets in a short time. They were, from the messages they were sending home, you can see a little bit that they were at the same time excited. It has been a tremendous find with all this last week, 30 to 50 tins full of tablets and fragments coming in each day, and they had really trouble like processing all those tablets in the field, because they knew that they would be divided according to the laws of the time between Pennsylvania, the University of Pennsylvania Museum, us, and the Iraq Museum. So they really wanted to document as much as they could in the field. And while they were really excited because Sumerian literature was showing up, they were also like surprised of finding 1,400 tablets and fragments in this small area of one house. And the tablets were literally everywhere. They were on the floors, they were in the walls, they were built into installations like benches, and this all made this house literally a tablet house, a beat tupim in Akkadian, or a house where tablets are distributed, which is an eduba in Sumerian, and this would be the answer of our riddle. So by accident, they had found what would be a scribal school, and not only the answer to a riddle, but it really changed scholarship in cuneiform studies forever, I would say, finding this schoolhouse. And I'm very lucky to stand here now and to build on 70 years of research in this field. And what I will do in the following is we will follow a fictive student through education in House F, entering blind and hopefully leaving seeing. And we will do this using the most basic building blocks and my favorite things, cuneiform tablets. And you will see different stations. We will spend a lot of time on our tablet, our title object, and we will look at some homework, and hopefully our student will graduate at the end, and we will learn a little bit about the curriculum and some of the challenges still remaining. And with all that being said, I'm gonna jump into this tablet and into an exercise in multiplication. When you hold this, our title objects you've seen on the banners, when you hold this tablet as a curator in your hands, it has the unassuming number 3276, but when you hold it, the first thing you notice is how heavy this tablet feels compared to the much smaller objects you're used to. It really feels important. While normal clay tablets, legal tablets, have the size of an iPhone, this tablet has roughly the size of our exhibition catalog and also the weight of the exhibition catalog. So it's a really heavy, hardbound book you're holding in your hand. And you can't help but wonder how someone can hold it in the hand while working in it over time and your hand doesn't got numb. So bear with a poor student while working. Then your eye moves to the left of the object, where you see that the practiced hand of a teacher has quickly written a multiplication table on it. It's a table for the large number, at least for me it's large, 432, and it's written as everything in Babylonian math in sexagesimal system. So 432 is 7 times 60 plus 12. And then this is going through a normal multiplication table. So times 1 is 432, times 2 is 864, times 3 is 1296, and so on and so on. And you can see that this is going on for a while. And depending on how you feel about math, I mean, for me, this is like not my favorite thing to do, but perhaps our student liked it. What we know is that our student had to practice for several hours on this tablet. If you look to the right side, you see that practice has made the tablet a little bit thinner on that side already. This student wrote the pattern down on the right side, erased it, used the small vessel, which we have also found in House F, to re-wet, and did it all over again in the hope to finally commit this pattern to memory. And in the end, hopefully they succeeded, because what we see that they erased it one last time and then only kept the teacher's writing. So if you want to trace like those marks, you can do it in the exhibition. We have a 3D printed model there. And if you do it, and if you have large hands, you will notice that those of the children working in the school were likely much smaller than your hand. And I hope that you start wondering, who were those students like practicing multiplication in Nippur? If you would ask them yourself, what they would tell you likely were their names. They would be rather proud of their fathers, who are important scribe, administrators, priests in the city of Nippur. They would also tell you that Nippur is a really important city in Babylonia, with its temple, the Akor, and the temple tower, Dur-Anki, this ziggurat, which is still dominating the landscape nowadays. And yeah, the senior students could possibly tell you a lot about the importance of the god Enlil as the head of the pantheon. If asked about the current king, they would point you to a certain Samsu-Iluna in Babylon, who is possibly known to some of you as the successor of King Hammurabi, who is like really well known even in our times. They would also tell you, possibly because they have some knowledge about that in school, that Nippur has rather a tumultuous 200 years of history at their time, where it has changed between the kings of Isin, Larsa, and Babylon, but all of them really treasured Nippur as a seat of the god Enlil. And in school, they were, as we will later see, preserving also hymns to those kings of Isin, Larsa, and knowledge about gods like Enlil. The names of the ancient students are almost all lost to us, which sadly comes also, we don't have really strong information about their identities, like their families, their age, their gender. This is all lost to us. But we assume from what we reconstruct that most of the families lived in the neighborhood directly around the schools, and that their homes were partially excavated by the joint expedition. You can find some of the objects from their houses, like this beautiful bullman, which is normally part of a regular gallery display, as part of their houses. So this is likely what they had in their houses. We also do have legal documents coming from their houses, and those tell us more about the status of their parents, who were members of the local elite with connections to the many temples in Nippur. This tablet, for example, deals with division of temple offices in certain temples in Nippur. Some of the really question all our visitors are curious about is, when did children start school? And this is one of the most trickiest questions to answer still nowadays, because there is no information in the ancient texts, so scholars either reconstruct based on other administrative texts that children start around 5 to 6, like we do, or use this one and singular beautiful tablet where a student left their bite marks and do dental analysis on it and then suggest that they started around 10 or 11. But even if we leave, imagine that, like you bite in a tablet and people later make a whole argument about it. Even if we leave the tricky question of age aside, the gender of the students is an equally fraught point for modern scholars. You may have noted that I have referred to our anonymous students, and I will continue to do so with gender-neutral language. This takes into account that we do not know the gender of the individual students who wrote our tablets, and the fact that the word schoolchild itself is gender-neutral in Sumerian. Scholars also know that some women, at least, like certain Naditu priestesses in Nippur, were literate and educated. However, leaving all this aside, we cannot overlook that Babylonia itself is an absolute patriarchal society as its core, and especially the Iduba, the Scribal school in Nippur, was a place where masculinity was constructed and also celebrated. And I have little doubt, for instance, that the teacher who wrote the satirical story School Days, which I will use throughout the talk today, was imagining the school child to be a boy rather than a girl. Let's look a little bit into School Days. Warning ahead, School Days is not a realistic text. It's a story, and it's a satirical story, but it's a story which was taught in House F. So if we read the beginning, "School kid, where have you been going since the beginning of time?" "I went to school." "What did you do at school?" "I recited my tablet, I ate my meal, I formed a new tablet, wrote and completed it. Then they assigned me the teacher-student exercise tablet, exactly the tablet you just saw in the beginning." So let's follow our student into school, starting in the morning. We know from this text that they had to rather an early start in the morning, quick breakfast, and then they quickly went to school because one of their main goals were to be on time to really avoid harsh punishment. Luckily, school was only a few houses away. They entered school. Can you see? Oh, what? They entered school through an entryway, which was possibly arched, and then went into the courtyard. Possibly there, they greeted the teacher, the father of the school. They sat down, and instruction started. The schoolhouse is small, like an ordinary home, allowing only a handful of pupils and their teacher at all times. The teacher and possibly his family also likely lived in the same building, and indeed our student working in the courtyard could smell some bread baking here in the kitchen. So the first task of the day was usually possibly to prepare the new tablet, and in our case, this teacher-student exercise where we'll have later the multiplication written on it. After getting permission, the student took clay from a box here in the courtyard and started shaping the large tablet by flattening and folding sheets of clay, making sure that making such a large tablet was challenging, but what we can see from the result, our student rather succeeded well, and the teacher was pleased when he had to write the multiplication exercise. Based on School Days, we know that they had a short lunch break, and then possibly our students transitioned here into this room, and they continued the education in the afternoon, possibly sitting on the bench here, which is built from recycled tablets. The text about school life, the excavated architecture, and the objects found in the house together allow us to reconstruct school life in Babylonia. And when planning the exhibition, we really made sure to include as much as we can in the floor plan of the exhibition itself. So you are literally entering through an archway into schoolhouse. Light conditions, if you have seen it, change from light colors outdoors to the darker, gloomier inside of a Babylonian house. And accidentally and not on purpose, even the floor reminds us of a clay floor, and you can even use the ceiling to see the beams, which was not planned but really comes well together. The space of House F would be roughly the same as the exhibition space, even a bit smaller, and we placed the walls strategically so they remind us where the walls are placed in the ancient schoolhouse. But I must admit that modern museum architecture does not allow for tight spaces like Babylonian houses do, so we had to make some compromises, so you can see that the space is much tighter here than in the exhibition itself. The walls itself, we know that there was some decoration with clay plaques like this striding majestic lion, which was discovered in the school. For display of the cuneiform tablets, we decided to display them vertically. Also, we do not know with absolute certainty that in this schoolhouse they were on shelves, because most were found in secondary context, meaning they were already discarded. But we know from other Babylonian libraries that they were indeed stored on shelves, so this is what we're trying to replicate with the cases. Most of the tablets actually were not treasured, but they were thrown out after practice, either back into the recycling box to become a new tablet, or they were built into walls or the installations like the benches, and even the tablet recycling box is built from tablets. And if you look at our tablet here, you can see that this was broken in many pieces, possibly already in antiquity, and discarded. So they were not cherished. They were also mostly not baked. They were just thrown out once the things were memorized. But before we throw out the tablet, let's let our student at least finish their exercise, and let's look on the back side or reverse of our tablet. Inscribing this reverse, we can imagine, was possibly the afternoon task for our students. To do so, they flipped their tablet around, flipping it vertically. And then they divided it into 4 columns. And they started working on a long list of words. I'm only doing the beginning here. Man, king, crown prince status, minister, vizier, minister of the inner household, minister of the guards, and so on, and so on. All those words were written with unique signs in Sumerian, which was also the language of the instruction. And while this is a really simple exercise at first glance, and it was possibly boring for our student over time, lexical lists like this one were an important tool of instruction. They helped students understand all the intricacies of cuneiform writing, which consisted of hundreds of signs, which had many readings, both as word signs and also as syllabs. So man, for example, was Lu, king was Lugal, and so on. And you can also see that those lists were not only organized thematically, but also graphically. You can see that similar shapes of sign, like here this Lu shape, which is also based off Lugal, literally big man, is dominating, and then we are jumping into this sign, which is repeated all over. And while some lists are, like this one, are organized thematically, others are just following sign shapes. Like this has all the same sign shape. This beautiful tablet is written by an advanced student, and they are glossing it and giving us different readings here. So this very sign is read E when it means oil or ghee, ne, for example, in the pronoun he. To pass or to flow, then it's sal, or mu, then it's good or beautiful. And using those sign lists, they learned cuneiform. They learned also like meanings, vocabulary in Sumerian. And the Sumerian language is really also a hurdle for them, because at home, at the time, they spoke Akkadian or Babylonian, which is a Semitic language connected to Arabic or Hebrew, but schooling was done in Sumerian. Sumerian was at this time a dead language, but was still preferred for literature, inscriptions, religious texts, and if you're in a traditional city like Nippur, it's also preferred for legal text there. And as Sumerian was the language of scribal tradition, it was also the language of education, especially in a place like Nippur. Imagine it like being taught in Latin or in another secondary language in school. And the satirical text School Days pretty much tells us that if you spoke Akkadian in school, you got flogged. So the men in charge of Sumerian said they spoke Akkadian and flogged me, which is obviously not a good outcome for our student. But scholars think that this is only like one side of the story. Indeed, like many of the lexical lists contain glosses, meaning like readings in Akkadian, and we can assume that the teacher at least gave some explanations in Akkadian as well. And tablets like this one, where the student wrote like the Sumerian or the sign here, the reading in Sumerian here, and then all the Akkadian translation, also show that by going to school, they got literacy in writing their own native language, Babylonian. But in Nippur, in a traditional place like Nippur, they rarely practiced anything like, for example, writing a mere letter in Babylonian or writing an administrative text in Babylonian. That's things they did not practice at school. Our students, at this point when they wrote this tablet, had likely already memorized the many meanings of the signs. If you count, I don't let you count, but it's around 126 entries of the lexical lists of profession they had to write. And I think they really worked quickly through the exercise, being happy when they were done. But if you look closely, you can see that some of the columns are rather crooked, and the handwriting is not neat at all. And School Days has a beautiful comment on that as well. My teacher said, "Your handwriting is not good at all," and flogged me. So our poor student got flogged like once more in the same day. But leaving that aside, I think they had already made really good progress on their way through the curriculum. And this is what we are going to look at next. So leaving all the punishments aside for the DIT, our student is really nearing possibly the end of the first of two phases of education. And we are going to look at the first phase first. And tablets like the one I've showed you now multiple times, like those teacher-student exercises or type 2 tablets, help us, meaning the scholars, also to reconstruct the sequence of education. Scholars like Nick Feltois discovered that on those tablets, students wrote like the new material on the front of the tablet and the previously studied material on the backside from memory. So this is new by copying, and this is by memory. And so we can do the vice versa and reconstruct that the list of profession and human beings was taught before they started with multiplication. And using many, many of those tablets, Feltois and others were able to reconstruct the curriculum. And I'm walking you briefly through that. You will hear much more, I think, next month in the lecture by Paul De Niro, they started their first days at school really by learning how to manipulate clay, how to hold the stylus from reed, how to make impressions. And then once they had done their first exercises, they did something we are even doing nowadays at the beginning of our education, writing names. But in true Babylonian fashion, they did not only write their names, but the names of possibly every name they can imagine in form of long lists. So lists are really a dominating element. And again, I'm not having time today to go into details of lists. You saw two of them already. What I want to highlight for you is the sheer amount of numbers of lines those students had to memorize. When they worked from lists of trees to wooden objects to over stones, plants, and fishes, geographical names, foodstuff, to professions and human beings, and to all those sign lists. So they memorized thousands of lines of lexical lists, and our student was just arriving at the end of those, starting with the first mathematical text, which were taught alongside lists of measurements like lengths and area measurements. And at the same time, students also started writing their first legal contracts, applying some of the knowledge from the mathematical text, and finally, writing, after possibly years of lists, writing a sentence in Sumerian, which was also really possibly exciting for them. However, our poor student, before arriving there, had to do some homework at the end of the day. Let's imagine this is their homework. School Days tells us in the late afternoon they assigned me my hand tablet, which is usually a round or a small rectangle tablet which fits perfectly in your hand. And none of those tablets were found in the school itself, but all of them were found in the houses surrounding school. So this really solidified the idea that there are homework and people were taking them home. And you can imagine that our student was rather excited that the teacher suddenly started writing a sentence in Sumerian, a proverb, on the one side of the exercise, because this meant that they would soon enter the second phase of education, where they started working on the first 10 literary compositions, discover songs of ancient kings, hymns of goddesses and temples, and at the end, even something like Gilgamesh and the story of Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu and the famous fight against Huwawa, the guardian of the cedar forest. The second phase of education really consisted of what most scholars summarize under the umbrella term of literature. And we don't have teacher-student exercises to reconstruct the second phase of education, but we do have small catalogs like this beautiful object we loaned from the University of Pennsylvania, which has a list, all the titles, or better, the first words of the compositions a student had to study. And we know that they studied those first 10 texts in sequence, starting with a hymn to King Shulgi, I, the king from the womb, and then ending with the Gilgamesh text, the Lord of the Mountains of the Living One, which is one of the Gilgamesh texts. And after that, the curriculum gets more open, but students still study a lot of literature. And this is possibly one of the topics scholars are still puzzled nowadays, or where scholars agree pretty much that the first phase there was to train students in literacy, in cuneiform writing system, also including some exercises like writing contracts and mathematical exercises. But opinions are really open on the second phase of education. So what's the aim there of studying all this literature? Opinions range from training students in scholarly literacy, making them even better in understanding Sumerian and cuneiform, over preserving knowledge in Sumerian in troubled times in Nippur, to forming the students into a social elite. And for the exhibition, we pretty much argue that all of those points are valid and true, but we also think and try to stress a little bit more that those texts also contain lessons in topics like religion, rhetoric, morals, and morally acceptable behavior, legends, and history. And it became also clear to us, like reading a lot of the text really holistically, coming from lexical lists. Like we did this as an experiment with the students where we first spent a whole quarter on lexical lists and then jumped into those literary texts, that most of the texts fulfill many purposes at the same time. And I will give you only 2 examples in the interest of time. The first one is part of the Decade. It's the second of the first 10 texts the students studied. And I'm just reading it to you, like a short extract. I am the one who raises the abundant harvest, the life of the land. I am the farmer who piles up his harvest heap. I am the shepherd making ghee and milk abundant in the stable. I am the one who grows fish and birds in the swamp. I am the river of abundance bringing flowing water. I am the one who increases the splendor of great mountains. I am the one giving great strength by Enlil. I am Lippet-Eshter, his respectful young man. In practicing this text, the student certainly gained a better understanding of the usage of signs and their sounds. If you remember the exercise with the repeated small sign E or Ni, you can see here in yellow 4 different ways this sign was used in this text. You can also possibly see that the student was learning more about vocabulary, about agriculture, and practicing a grammatical structure where for us in the beginning and Sumerian in the end, it's like really repeated this I am, which was new to the student at that time. They had seen it once before in the Shulgi text. And furthermore, this contained a really interesting lesson in history because Lippet-Eshter was a king who lived 200 years prior to school taking place. And also it conveyed a lot about ideal kingdom, or what an ideal king should be. The second of the example is really interesting. It's written beautifully by an advanced student that I've learned with my skillful hands, my pure hands, to write the tablets of Sumer and Akkad, that I have made the Eduba shine by completely mastering the reed stylus and the scribal art, that I have devoted myself to the art of music and now known the occasions when praise songs are sung, and so on. What you note here possibly is all the vocabulary dealing with school, schooling, but interestingly, this vocabulary is all shared with the story School Days. But this is not about an unfortunate student or fortunate student. This is a praise song for King Ishme-Dagan, praising him as a masterful scribe. And I would argue that our student, possibly training to become a scribe, could easily see themselves in this passage as they trained to master the scribal art, to become a master of the reed stylus, and so on, and possibly even going into music and learning about praise songs. And by writing this, students did not only train vocabulary, but they become the one who knew the scribal art. They become proficient in scribal art. They knew how to learn, or they learned possibly those songs of praise, like this very one they were writing, and knew when it was like appropriate to perform them. And ultimately, by mastering that, I mean, those students became the master of the scribal art and became possibly able to compose literature and to teach themselves. So this is like really a text which plays on very many levels, on education, and a lot of the advanced texts in the Eduba are that way, that there are like multiple layers to each of them. But returning very briefly to our poor student, before all this, before mastering the scribal art, there was homework. And after a long day, our poor student, they copied quickly this proverb the teacher had written, I would say not paying much attention to the content, and then started to attempt this calculation here. They had to calculate the reciprocal of the number, a really large number, 174640, and while they remembered the number, they did not remember how to arrive at the result. So partway through the calculation, they simply gave up, wrote like the final result here, 2 lines underneath, and home it was, and then they shouted to their father. The father, as a literate scribe, the first thing what he did is reading the proverb, and what he saw there didn't amuse him because he read about his son, a chattering scribe's guilt is great. So I guess like the teacher somehow was not too happy with our student and had once more put an unwarranted lesson in behavior, leading perhaps to a certain frustration with our student. If we follow the story of school days, the situation of our student escalated quickly. Frustrated with the experience at school, including the multiple beatings received over the day, they started hating the scribal art, and they didn't look forward to learning anymore. However, our nifty student also had a solution, namely bribing the teacher. They decided and told their father, give me his gift. He shall give to you multiplication tables, the father. He shall free me from calculation and bookkeeping. And the plan was followed through, at least in the story. And once the teacher was well fed and situated with gift, the situation of our student improved, and he was given a blessing. May Nisaba, the lady of all protective deities, be your personal goddess. May she guide your read stylus well. May she take away all mistakes from your assigned homework. Yes. May you be the leader of your brothers. May you be the foremost among your peers. May you be outstanding among the other school kids. So, with this blessing in mind, our student could look to graduation and finally having a good career ahead. We don't know how long education took, certainly several years, and there was likely no graduation ceremony. Also, scholars think that finely or neatly written tablets with multiple columns could serve as a final exam. Our student would possibly not choose, if they had a say, any mass, but perhaps wrote this beautiful integrated copy of a praise poem to King Shulgi, where the king praised himself once more proudly as, I'm an experienced scribe who does not neglect a thing. Certainly, we notice with those advanced copies in House F, and if you work with them longer time, you get a good feeling that the ones of more advanced students or even the teacher are beautifully written, smallly in beautiful handwriting, and at least that has significantly improved over time. Where did our student go? What did the graduates of the Scribal school become? Part of this long list of professions I showed you in the beginning includes many of potential occupations for future scribes. Scribes worked in administrations of palaces and temples, as priests, as musicians, as lamentation singers, and so on. We could imagine that our student followed likely in the footsteps of their father and became a temple administrator, keeping records for the outgoing and incoming temple sings, or if they go for a more exciting career, started as a lamentation priest, appeasing some of the angry gods. In any of those cases, we must admit that while the teachers always stress and the literature stresses that they knew everything about the scribal art when graduating. This was not really the case. They had neither learned in school how to balance an account, nor how to write an advanced lamentation, and those things need to be still studied after the basic education they got. However, what they got in the Nippur Iduba was certainly a solid education. And with that, I'm at the end of my talk. If you want to learn more, we have an adult education class on the topic coming up, or you just return to the next talk. And also thanks from Tupi, and he is sadly temporarily sold out.